knock, knock. The first night, billionaire Alexander Kane thought it was the wind. The second night, he thought it was one of the guards checking in. But the third night, when that same soft, rhythmic knock echoed through the marble halls again at exactly midnight, he knew it wasn't coincidence. 3 knocks, a pause, then 2 more. Always the same pattern. Always at midnight. He muted the television, his jaw tightening. The city skyline glowed through his penthouse windows, but inside his mansion, the silence felt alive, watching him, breathing around him. For a man who ruled silence, any sound felt like an invasion. Alexander Kane controlled empires with his voice alone. When he spoke, deals were sealed. When he went quiet, men trembled. But tonight, it wasn't power that filled the air. It was unease. He stood, glass of whiskey in hand, listening. There it was again. Knock, knock, knock. His eyes narrowed. He stepped to the door, twisting the handle sharply. The hallway beyond was empty. Only shadows stretched along the marble floor. The faint scent of jasmine lingered, delicate, haunting. No one. He exhaled slowly, closing the door. But his heart wouldn't settle. Downstairs, the maid he'd hired only 3 weeks ago was finishing her duties. She was small, graceful, almost ghost-like in her movements. She never spoke, never smiled for long. The manager had introduced her as Elara. Alexander had nodded distractedly, more focused on a conference call than the quiet woman standing in his home. She worked differently from the others, gentler, deliberate, as if each action had weight. He'd noticed once how her eyes seemed distant, like she was somewhere else entirely, somewhere painful. Still, he never thought twice about her. Until now. The next morning, he called security. "Do you patrol the West Wing at night?" "No, sir," the head guard replied. "That wing's off limits, per your instructions." Alexander frowned. Then someone's disobeying orders. "Check the cameras." Hours later, the report came back. Nothing. No one was near his room. The footage showed empty halls. No movement, no sound. That night, when midnight came, he was ready. Sitting upright on the couch, the lights dimmed, waiting. Knock, knock, knock. The pattern was identical. He rose, quiet as a shadow, and pulled the door open mid-knock. No one. Just air and jasmine. His pulse pounded in his ears. "Who's there?" he called, voice echoing down the hall. Silence. He closed the door harder this time, his thoughts restless. "I built a billion-dollar empire," he muttered, "but I can't find a damn sound in my own house." Sleep didn't come that night. The next morning, Elara was already working when he entered the dining room. Her hands moved gracefully over the table, arranging the silverware, her face serene as dawn. "Did you notice anything strange last night?" he asked suddenly. She looked up, startled, then shook her head. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She pointed to her ear and then to her throat, gesturing softly. He froze. "You can't speak?" She gave a faint smile, nodding once. Deaf. Mute. That explained the quiet. Alexander felt a strange mix of discomfort and pity. He wasn't used to silence that couldn't be broken. "Carry on," he said quickly, turning away. But when he did, he caught a glimpse of her touching a framed photo on the wall, the one of Amelia, his daughter. "Don't touch that," he said sharply. She flinched, lowering it immediately, bowing her head. Her hands trembled slightly before she returned to her work. Something in him softened for a moment. He hadn't meant to snap. But that photo was sacred. Amelia had been gone for 5 years. And yet, Elara's expression when she touched it, it wasn't curiosity. It was grief. He found himself watching her longer than he should. Her movements were slow but deliberate, every gesture full of care. And then he saw it. A faint scar behind her right ear, a thin, pale line disappearing into her hair. He didn't know why, but it lingered in his mind long after she left the room. That night, He refused to sleep. When the clock struck midnight, he stood beside the door, heartbeat steady. Knock, knock, knock. He swung it open instantly. Elara gasped, candle in hand, her eyes wide. The flame flickered, casting trembling light across her pale face. "What the hell is this?" Alexander demanded. "Why do you knock on my door every night?" Her hands shook. She fumbled for the small notepad she always carried, writing quickly. "I'm sorry." "I didn't mean to disturb you." He snatched the note, his frown deepening. "Then why do it?" She wrote again, slower this time. "I just need to make sure you're safe." He blinked. "Safe? From what?" Her lips trembled. Tears welled in her eyes. She hesitated, then simply shook her head, turned, and hurried away. "Wait!" he called, but she was already gone down the corridor, candlelight fading into darkness. Alexander stood there, confused, staring at the empty hall. The faint scent of jasmine lingered again, like a whisper he couldn't decipher. The following evening, a small envelope was slipped under his door. No name, no return address, just his initials. A K. He tore it open. Inside was an old photograph, water-stained but familiar. Amelia, laughing beside a river, sunlight in her hair. But behind her, faint, half-hidden, was Elara. He felt the world tilt beneath him. His daughter's accident had happened 5 years ago. Elara had appeared 5 years ago. He gripped the photograph, heart pounding. How did this woman know Amelia? He stormed through the halls, but her quarters were empty. The guards hadn't seen her leave. All night, he stared at the photo, tracing the edges with his thumb. Amelia had been smiling, the same smile she'd worn before the crash that took her away. And now, a deaf maid who appeared out of nowhere was knocking on his door every night. Coincidence? Number. This was something else, something buried. He needed answers, and for the first time in years, Alexander Kane felt something that terrified him more than loss. Hope. When morning came, Alexander didn't go to the office. His thoughts kept circling back to that photograph and the silent maid who seemed to live inside the shadows of his home. Every memory of his daughter, Amelia, began to feel like a puzzle piece rearranging itself, forming a new image that terrified him. He found Elara in the garden, kneeling by the roses with her gloves on, trimming the petals with careful precision. Sunlight danced on her hair, catching strands of gold that framed her calm face. She didn't notice him approach until his shadow fell over her. "Where did you get that picture?" he asked quietly. She froze, the scissors slipping slightly in her hand. Her lips parted, but no words came. She slowly reached into her apron and pulled out her notepad, scribbling quickly. "I didn't mean to scare you," she wrote. He snatched the notepad, his voice rising. "Don't play innocent. You were in that photo with my daughter. Why? Who are you?" She wrote again, hands trembling. "I knew her." Alexander's heart thudded painfully. "How?" Elara didn't answer. She turned to walk away, but his hand caught her arm. "Don't walk away from me, Elara." His voice cracked with something between anger and desperation. "I buried my daughter 5 years ago. That picture, where did it come from?" Her eyes filled with tears. She pulled out the same photograph and held it out to him, tracing Amelia's face with her finger. Then she touched her own heart and slowly, hesitantly, pointed toward the river visible in the distance. The gesture was clear. The river. The same river where Amelia's car had plunged. He whispered, "You were there." Her eyes widened in shock. She looked away, then nodded. Alexander stepped back, his chest tightening as realization began to take form. "You were there, the night she died." Elara's lips trembled as she wrote something down and handed it to him. "I tried to save her." He froze. His throat felt dry, his voice almost breaking. "You... what?" She nodded again, tears spilling freely now. Then she wrote slower, the letters uneven as her shaking hand struggled to stay steady. The car went into the river. I was walking home from work near the charity center. I saw it fall. I didn't think. I ran into the water. It was freezing. The current was too strong. Her eyes darted between him and the page, desperate for him to understand. I reached her. I pulled her from the car. She was breathing, but weak. I screamed for help. Then something hit my head. I woke up in the hospital days later. I couldn't hear anything anymore. The doctor said the impact damaged my hearing. They told me she didn't make it. Alexander couldn't breathe. His hands clenched around the paper until it crumpled. He turned away, every breath feeling like fire in his chest. "You're telling me you lost your hearing, trying to save my daughter," he said hoarsely. She nodded once. "Why didn't you come to me?" She hesitated, then wrote with shaking hands. "Because I didn't know who you were." I never saw her again until I saw her picture here. And when I realized this was her home, I just wanted to make sure you were okay. I didn't want anything. I just needed to see you alive. Alexander's composure finally cracked. He sat on the stone bench, staring at her. His mind swirled with images of Amelia, her laughter, her joy, her final words to him before the crash. "You work too much, Dad. You'll miss life if you don't stop to feel it." He'd never forgotten. And now, this maid, this silent woman, had risked her life to save the very thing he'd lost. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "You could have died." She smiled faintly, tears on her cheeks. She wrote, "I thought I was going to." But she held my hand under the water. She didn't let go. "I thought if I just held on too, maybe she'd live." He felt his throat tighten again. He stood, pacing a few steps away, running a hand through his hair. The sun was beginning to set, painting the garden gold. When he turned back to her, she looked small and fragile, like she might disappear with the next breeze. "You saved my daughter's last breath," he whispered, "and I didn't even know you existed." Her eyes softened. She wrote, "She saved me too." Something broke inside him. The man who'd built walls of glass and steel around his heart suddenly wanted to kneel down and thank her, but his pride held him still. "Come with me," he said quietly. He led her inside, into the west wing, the one no one else entered. The air there smelled faintly of Amelia's perfume. Her room had remained untouched, exactly as it was 5 years ago. Her books still sat on the nightstand. Her painting hung over the bed. Elara's fingers brushed across the photos, trembling. Her eyes filled again, and she turned away quickly, clutching the notepad against her chest. "She had your eyes," Elara wrote, passing him the note. Alexander swallowed hard. "And your courage," he replied softly. He walked toward the window, staring out at the city that had once meant everything to him. "I never forgave myself for that night," he said quietly. "I missed her call. She'd called me, and I ignored it because of a meeting. I thought I could call back later. I never got the chance." He turned back to Elara, voice low and unsteady. "And you? You were there, fighting to save her when I wasn't." She shook her head quickly, tears sliding down her cheeks. She wrote, "You couldn't have known. She didn't blame you. I know she didn't." He stepped closer. "How can you possibly know that?" Elara looked at him for a long time, then wrote, "Because when she looked at me, right before I lost consciousness, she smiled." Alexander froze. "She smiled?" Elara nodded. "She wasn't afraid. She just looked peaceful, like she forgave everything." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The silence between them was so deep it felt holy. Then, for the first time since Amelia's death, Alexander's eyes filled with tears. He turned away quickly, but Elara stepped closer, gently placing a hand on his arm. Her touch was light, trembling, but real. He looked at her and saw not a maid, not a stranger, but the only person left on earth who had seen his daughter's last moment. Something in his chest gave way. He whispered, "I don't know why you're still here, Elara. but I'm glad you are." She smiled faintly, signing something small with her hands. He frowned. What did that mean? She quickly wrote on her pad, "It means thank you." He took the notepad from her hand gently. "No," he said softly. "Thank you." That night, when the clock struck midnight, there was no knock. But Alexander stood by the door anyway, waiting. He found himself missing that sound, the soft reminder that someone out there cared enough to check if he was okay. For the first time, the mansion didn't feel haunted. It felt alive. He looked up at the ceiling and whispered, "Amelia, you sent her to me, didn't you?" Outside, the wind whispered faintly through the trees. And in that sound, faint and rhythmic, he thought he heard something that felt like peace. The days that followed were different. The mansion, once filled with nothing but echoes and grief, began to breathe again. Elara moved through the halls like sunlight in human form. Quiet, steady, warm. Alexander found himself listening for her footsteps every morning, the soft shuffle of her shoes against marble. The sound that meant someone still cared enough to stay. He'd started joining her in the garden. They didn't talk much. He spoke, and she wrote. But somehow silence between them said more than any words could. One afternoon, he found her kneeling by the lilies, her head tilted slightly, eyes closed. "What are you doing?" he asked softly. She smiled faintly, picking up her notepad to write. "I'm listening. To nothing. It used to make me sad. Now it makes me calm," he nodded, sitting beside her. "You've lived with silence for 5 years?" She nodded, then wrote, "It's not the silence that hurts. It's the memories that play too loudly inside it." Her words hit him hard. He stared at the lilies, remembering his daughter's laughter echoing through the same garden years ago. "Amelia used to say something similar," he murmured. "She said silence can be kind, if you stop fighting it." Elara's lips curved in a small smile. For the first time, she reached out and touched his hand gently, as if to tell him he wasn't alone anymore. Weeks passed, and one evening, as the golden light faded from the sky, Alexander finally asked the question that had lived in his mind since the first night he'd heard that faint knock on his door. "Elara," he said softly, "why did you always knock every night before you left?" She looked startled. Her hands froze over her notepad. Then she began to write slowly, carefully, her fingers trembling as she formed each word. "I knocked because I wanted to make sure you were living." He frowned slightly, confused. "Living?" She nodded, then continued writing. "When I pulled Amelia out of the river, she was crying." She was cold and scared. She kept whispering, "He's not picking up. I wish I could knock on his door and make him listen." The air left Alexander's lungs in a rush. He felt his knees go weak, his chest tightening as if the world had stopped breathing. "She said that?" he whispered. Elara nodded. "I wanted to knock for her," she wrote, "so you'd know someone was still waiting outside your door." Tears filled his eyes before he could stop them. He turned away, covering his face with his hands. For years, he had cursed himself for missing that call, for being too busy, too distracted. And now, to know that Amelia had wanted nothing more than for him to open the door. He turned back to Elara, his voice shaking. "You carried her memory in every knock." Elara's tears slipped down her cheeks, but she smiled softly. She wrote, "It was my way of keeping her promise alive." He took the notepad gently from her trembling hands and whispered, "You've done more for me than anyone else ever has. You brought my daughter's voice back to me through your silence." That night, he made a decision. The next morning, he arranged for her to see the best audiologist in the country. She refused at first, shaking her head, writing, "You've already done too much." But Alexander insisted. "No," he said firmly. You gave me my life back. Let me try to give you yours." She smiled faintly, but tears welled in her eyes. The process was long and delicate. Weeks of treatment, surgeries, and therapy. Alexander visited her every day, sitting quietly by her hospital bed, talking even though she couldn't hear him yet. He told her about Amelia's favorite songs, about the way she used to dance barefoot in the rain, about the garden lilies that always bloomed too early. Sometimes he brought her fresh flowers. Sometimes he just sat and watched her sleep. And then, one morning, everything changed. He walked into her hospital room and saw her sitting up, tears in her eyes, as the doctor smiled beside her. "Mr. Sterling," the doctor said warmly. "She can hear you now." Alexander froze, his throat tightening. He took a slow step forward. "Elara?" he whispered. Her eyes widened instantly, her lips parted. I can hear you." The words came out hoarse, broken, but they were real. He let out a shaky laugh, covering his mouth. You can speak." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I haven't heard a voice in 5 years." "Yours is the first." He moved closer, his voice soft and trembling. "Then I'll keep speaking until you never forget it." She laughed through her tears, and for the first time, her laughter filled the room like sunlight after a storm. Months later, they stood together in the same garden where it all began. The wind moved gently through the roses. Elara turned to him, her voice still quiet but steady now. "Do you know something?" she said softly. "Sometimes, silence teaches us to listen with the heart." Alexander smiled, eyes glistening. "And sometimes, broken people are the ones who know how to heal others best." They stood together, not as Billionaire and Maid anymore, but as two souls who had both lost and found something greater than words. As they walked back to the mansion, she paused by the door, the same one she used to knock on each night. She placed her palm gently against it, closed her eyes, and whispered, "Good night, Amelia." Alexander stood behind her, whispering, "She'd be proud of you." Elara turned and smiled, her voice warm and clear. "No, she'd be proud of us," he smiled, nodding slowly. "Yes, us." The mansion lights flickered softly, and in that quiet glow, the billionaire who once lived in shadows found light again, not from wealth or power, but from the woman who taught him that love doesn't always need a voice to be heard. Months later, news broke about Alexander's sudden return to the social world. Journalists filled his home, eager to uncover what had sparked the billionaire's comeback. When one asked what changed him, Alexander smiled softly and said, "For years, I was surrounded by noise, but never truly listened. Then came my maid, a woman who couldn't hear a sound, yet taught me the meaning of listening." The cameras flashed, but he didn't mind. For the first time, his words weren't for the world, but for the one person who had turned his silence into peace. She had stolen his heart. Moral of the story: sometimes life takes away what we think we need, our sound, our pride, our certainty, only to teach us how to truly listen. Love isn't about hearing or speaking. It's about understanding, even in silence. And the richest hearts aren't those filled with gold, but with gratitude.